It was just a flashlight, a big black Maglite, the kind you keep in a drawer for when the power goes out. Heavy. Solid. It was sitting on the kitchen counter in the Ramsey house on the morning of December 26, 1996. While police and family friends swarmed the home, it just sat there. It was on a white tile counter next to a bowl. The bowl had pineapple in it. A spoon was in the bowl. Nearby was a glass of iced tea. It was a simple domestic scene. A late-night snack, maybe, but nothing about that day was simple, and that flashlight wasn't just a flashlight. In the chaos of the JonBenét Ramsey case, a case filled with a 3-page ransom note, a broken basement window, and a tiny body found in a wine cellar, that flashlight became something else. It became a question. It became a theory. For some, it became the answer. It sat on the counter, silent, but it spoke volumes. To understand what the flashlight really meant, you have to understand the scene, the wound, and the people involved. First, you have to picture the morning. Patsy Ramsey says she woke up early. She went downstairs and found a ransom note on the back staircase. The note was long, rambling, and very specific. It demanded $118,000. It warned them not to call the police. Patsy screamed. She checked JonBenét's room. The bed was empty. She called 911, and from that moment, the house was no longer a home. It was a crime scene, a poorly managed one, but a crime scene nonetheless. Police arrived. All friends and family arrived. People were walking through the house, making coffee, touching things. The scene was contaminated almost immediately. Detective Linda Arndt was one of the first officers there. She was the one who noted the flashlight. She saw it on the counter near the bowl of pineapple. Well, it just seemed like part of the kitchen clutter, a normal object in a terribly abnormal situation. It didn't scream evidence right away. It was just there. Hours later, the case took its darkest turn. John Ramsey, JonBenét's father, was asked by police to search the house one more time. He went to the basement. He found a small, unused room, the wine cellar. He opened the door, and there she was. JonBenét was on the floor, wrapped in her white blanket. A cord was around her neck, attached to a broken paintbrush handle. Duct tape was over her mouth. And her wrists were bound above her head. It was a horrifying staged scene. The autopsy would later reveal 2 causes of death: asphyxiation by strangulation and a severe head injury. The head injury was a massive 8-inch fracture to her skull. It was a blow of incredible force. The coroner said it would have caused immediate unconsciousness or death. This wasn't a small bump on the head, it was a devastating lethal injury. And that's when the flashlight on the kitchen counter stopped being just a flashlight. Investigators started looking for a weapon. What could have caused that kind of fracture? The injury was a depressed skull fracture, an indentation. They needed something blunt, heavy, and with a specific shape. They looked around the house, they looked at a golf club, they looked at other objects. And then they looked again at that big black Maglite. They took the flashlight into evidence. It was a D-cell Maglite, heavy enough to be a weapon. They measured it. The diameter of the flashlight's end cap, the part you hold, seemed to match the dimensions of the injury on JonBenét's skull. Some experts who later examined the evidence said it was a perfect fit. The circular shape, the size, the sheer weight of it. It could have delivered the kind of blow that crushed a child's skull. Suddenly, this mundane household object was the prime suspect for the murder weapon. But here is where the story of the flashlight gets strange. And this strangeness is at the heart of the entire case. If the flashlight was the weapon, you would expect to find evidence on it. You'd expect to find JonBenét's blood. You'd expect to find her hair. You'd expect to find fibers from her clothing, or the blanket she was wrapped in. The police found none of that. The flashlight was clean. It had been wiped down. There was no visible blood, no hair, nothing to directly link it to the violent act that took place in that house. This is the first great contradiction of the flashlight. It's a perfect weapon in theory, but a blank slate in reality. This absence of evidence is, in itself, a kind of evidence. It suggests that someone, after using it to strike a child, took the time to clean it. This is not the action of a panic intruder scrambling to get out of the house after a kidnapping gone wrong. This is the action of someone trying to cover their tracks, someone who had time, someone who was staging a scene. Then came the fingerprints. The police dusted the flashlight for prints, and what they found was just as confusing. There were no usable fingerprints on the outside of the flashlight's body. None. Again, this points to it being wiped clean. If you pick up and swing a heavy flashlight, you leave prints. Unless you're wearing gloves, or unless you wipe it down afterward. But they did find prints in one place. They opened the flashlight, they looked at the batteries inside, and on the batteries they found Patsy Ramsey's fingerprints. This discovery was a bombshell. Patsy's prints were not on the outside, where you'd hold it to use it as a light. Her prints were on the batteries, which you'd only touch if you were changing them. Patsy explained this. She said they'd had a power outage recently, or that the kids played with flashlights, and she might have changed the batteries at some point. It was a plausible explanation, a perfectly normal thing for a mother to do. But in the context of a murder investigation, it was something else. It placed her in direct contact with a potential murder weapon. Not just using it, but maintaining it. It was her flashlight, a family flashlight. This made it much harder to blame an outsider. Why would an intruder grab a flashlight, use it as a weapon, wipe it down meticulously, and then open it up to put batteries in? It makes no sense. The flashlight on the counter, wiped clean on the outside but with Patsy's prints on the inside, became a cornerstone of the theory that the Ramseys were involved. It fit the narrative that the crime was not a kidnapping, but a domestic incident that was covered up. The flashlight wasn't a random weapon of opportunity for an intruder. It was a household item, used in a moment of anger or panic, and then cleaned and placed back into the domestic scene, almost as if to pretend it was normal again. But which Ramsey? This is where the story of the flashlight splinters into different theories. For many years, the suspicion fell heavily on Patsy. The long, dramatic ransom note seemed to be written by her. The flashlight with her prints on the batteries pointed to her. The theory went something like this: JonBenét had a bedwetting problem. That night, she wet the bed again. Patsy, exhausted and stressed, maybe snapped. Or maybe there was a confrontation in the kitchen. JonBenét was eating pineapple, a food her parents later claimed they didn't give her. Perhaps there was a fight over the snack, a tantrum. In a moment of rage, Patsy grabbed the nearest heavy object, the flashlight, and struck her daughter. The blow was harder than she intended. It was fatal. Realizing what she'd done, she panicked. She and John then concocted an elaborate story to cover it up to protect Patsy. They wrote the ransom note. They staged the strangulation to obscure the head wound. They hid the body in the basement. In this theory, the flashlight on the counter is a symbol of Patsy's attempt to restore order. She cleaned the weapon and put it back, almost as if putting it in its place would undo the horrible thing that had just happened. It's a psychological act of denial. Then there is the theory that John Ramsey was involved. Perhaps he was the one who struck JonBenét. The motive is less clear in this scenario. Some have suggested abuse, but there's no solid evidence for that. Maybe he was the one who reacted to the bedwetting. In this version, he uses the flashlight, and Patsy helps him cover it up to protect her husband and her family. The flashlight is still a family weapon, a symbol of a secret kept within the four walls of that house. But there is a third theory. It's a theory that has gained more and more traction over the years, and it places the flashlight at the very center of the tragedy. This theory involves JonBenét's older brother, Burke, who was 9 years old at the time. This theory also begins in the kitchen. Burke and JonBenét are downstairs, Patsy and John are in bed. The kids are having a late-night snack, that bowl of pineapple. It was a big bowl, a family-sized portion. Burke's fingerprints were found on the bowl. JonBenét had undigested pineapple in her stomach, meaning she ate it shortly before she died. The parents had denied giving her pineapple, saying she was asleep when they got home that night. The scene writes itself. Burke is eating his pineapple. JonBenét comes downstairs. Like any little sister, she wants some. She reaches her hand into his bowl and steals a piece. This is a common scene in any family with siblings. A small argument, a moment of frustration. Burke, a 9-year-old boy, gets angry. He's not trying to kill his sister. He's just lashing out. He picks up the nearest thing to him. A big, heavy flashlight sitting on the counter. He swings it at her, telling her to get away from his food. He hits her on the head. He didn't mean to kill her. He's just a kid. But the flashlight is incredibly heavy, and a child's skull is fragile. The blow is catastrophic. JonBenét falls unconscious, dying. What happens next is the cover-up. The parents, John and Patsy, come downstairs. They find their daughter bleeding on the floor, their son standing over her with a flashlight. Their world shatters. They have a choice. Do they call the police and say their son just killed their daughter? They would lose one child to death and the other to the justice system. Their family would be destroyed forever. Or do they try to save their remaining child? In this theory, they make a desperate, terrible choice. They choose to protect Burke. They carry JonBenét's body to the basement. They stage the scene to look like a kidnapping and murder by an outside intruder. The strangulation is added to make it look like a sexual predator was involved, and to hide the fact that the head wound was the real cause of death. Patsy writes the ransom note, using words and phrases from movies to make it sound authentic. They create a story. And what about the flashlight? In this scenario, the flashlight's journey makes a terrifying kind of sense. Burke hits his sister and just puts it down. He's a kid, he doesn't think about wiping it clean or hiding it. He just drops it on the counter. The parents, in their frantic effort to stage the crime scene, are focused on the body, the note, the broken window. They remember the flashlight, they wipe it down, they get rid of the blood and hair. But they don't hide it. Why not hide it? Why leave the murder weapon out in plain sight on the kitchen counter? This is one of the most puzzling questions in the case, but if the parents are staging a crime, leaving it out could be part of the misdirection. An intruder wouldn't leave the weapon behind, wiped clean, in the middle of the kitchen. It's an act that points away from an intruder and toward the family, but maybe, in their panic, they thought the opposite. Maybe they thought hiding it would look more suspicious if it was ever found. Or maybe they simply wiped it and put it back where it belonged, an almost subconscious act of trying to put things back to normal. The flashlight in the Burke theory is the key that connects everything. It connects the pineapple, the late-night snack that started the fight. It connects Burke, whose fingerprints are on the bowl, and it connects to the head wound that killed JonBenét. It explains the motive, not a grand, evil plan, but a childish squabble that ended in tragedy. And it explains the parents' bizarre behavior in the days and weeks that followed. They weren't acting like grieving parents whose child was stolen by a monster. They were acting like people hiding a terrible secret, trying to protect their only living child. This is why the flashlight on the kitchen counter really mattered. It was more than a clue. It was a story. If an intruder killed JonBenét, the flashlight is a messy detail. Why that weapon? Why was it found in the house? Why was it wiped clean and left on the counter? An intruder would have likely brought his own weapon or used something and discarded it far away from the crime scene. The flashlight's presence makes the intruder theory difficult to believe, but if a family member killed JonBenét, the flashlight becomes the perfect, terrible instrument. It's a domestic object turned lethal, it's always there, in the house, available. It's condition wiped clean, no prints on the outside, a family member's prints on the inside us screams of a cover-up from within. It points to a crime that was not planned, but reactionary. An act of sudden violence, followed by a frantic, calculated attempt to hide the truth. The flashlight sits at the crossroads of all the evidence. It links to the forensic evidence of the head wound. And it links to the circumstantial evidence of the pineapple and Burke's fingerprints. And it links to the psychological evidence of the family's strange behavior and the elaborate staging of the crime scene. Over 2 decades have passed. The case is still cold. Patsy Ramsey died of cancer in 2006, maintaining her innocence to the end. John Ramsey and Burke Ramsey still maintain their innocence. No one has ever been charged with the murder of JonBenét. The flashlight was tested, examined, and debated by experts for years. It was never definitively proven to be the murder weapon. There was always that nagging lack of blood or hair, but for many who have studied the case, the flashlight is the silent witness. It's the object that tells the most likely story. It tells a story not of a mysterious foreign faction or a local predator who slipped in through a window. It tells a much sadder and, in some ways, a much more horrifying story. A story about a family. A story about a bowl of pineapple, a children's fight, and a moment of anger that could not be taken back. The flashlight on the kitchen counter meant that the monster wasn't outside. The monster was the moment itself. The tragedy wasn't just that a little girl was killed, but that the truth of how she died was buried under a mountain of lies and misdirection. The flashlight was a piece of that truth, left out in the open for everyone to see, but wiped clean of any easy answers. It just sat there, heavy and black, a symbol of a simple, terrible secret. It was just a flashlight, and it was everything.